All right, David Lewis here, owner of Mission Air Conditioning and Plumbing in Houston, Texas. We get this question a lot. It's why do I have hot spots and cold spots in my house? Why is it that when I walk from one room to the next, there's a difference in temperature? Why does that occur? And often that assumes that they don't like that. So we're gonna talk about why those things occur, and then we're gonna talk about a handful of fixes, things that you can do to respond to those hot spots and cold spots. Now, my advice here, caveat, is that we are in Houston, Texas. What works here may be a little bit different in other areas of the country, so please don't assume that this is the end-all be-all for you in your specific setting. If you're in Houston, we'd love to help you with your house. So, the house is one of the key elements as to why hot spots and cold spots occur. A lot of people assume I just need a bigger duct here, and that's the only solution that's needed. There are other elements involved when it comes to why a home has those hot spots and cold spots. A lot of that has to do with the building materials. So we have a picture of a house here. The house itself, all the materials, the windows, the insulation, the foundation that it's on, the type of studs, all of the elements that are involved in building a home affect ultimately how it takes on heat. So the better the insulation of that home, the more likely it is to protect against that heat. The less insulation that's on that home, and probably the older that home is, the more likely that it's going to have problems where there's hot spots and cold spots. So the home is a critical element to that outside of the actual cooling and heating system. So even during the day, you've got a sun exposure that occurs, your home is oriented a specific way, and the sun moves throughout the sky, which we learned when we were toddlers. And during that movement of the sun, the heat that the sun produces is affecting different areas of the house, which can create some of these elements. Now, the better your home is insulated, the more likely that you're able to contain and prevent that heat from affecting the house with these high differentials. So it would be like, do you live in an igloo cooler, an old igloo cooler, or do you live in a Yeti? A Yeti is gonna hold temperature better than an old cooler. So that being said, your air conditioning system can affect and will help, and there are a few elements involved with that. What people don't necessarily consider is that most of those elements are behind the walls or in the attic area, and so they don't see it and don't realize the conditions of their house. And a lot of times, those conditions are very, very poor. So when it comes to your system, you need to consider a couple elements with your air conditioning system. How old is that system? What condition is it? Is it sized properly to the house? That can matter. The condition of the ducts. There are a lot of ducts out there that are very, very old, and they're of course going to be more leaky and not going to have as good of insulation level, and therefore are going to have greater problems. Other elements include the actual design and size of those ducts. How are they dispersed throughout the house? How far away are they from the equipment? What is the distance? And what is the insulation of those ducts as well? So that's the side of the deal. There's two elements. You have what is your house made of, and then how is your air conditioning system designed. Now we're going to jump into different ways you can fix or overcome those hot spots and cold spots in your house. But my first question for you, and I may ask this again, is when you walk from one part to the house and there's a hot spot and cold spot, are you uncomfortable? That's a very critical question to ask when determining what solution to go with. If you are not actually uncomfortable, you just go, well, it's different from here to there, you're probably okay. So it's probably not worth going overboard with a fix when you're actually still comfortable, but you do notice that differential. So that being said, let's jump into a few solutions that might help your house. Okay, so how do you fix these hot and cold spots? We're gonna kind of roll through these in order of severity. So your first option when you have a hot spot and cold spot in your house is to do nothing and just to live with it and be okay. Next step would be, at least for us, would be to consider how is the airflow being distributed in the house itself. So we have a setup for a training unit, air conditioning system, of what's very typical in our environment here in Houston. So you've got an evaporator coil, and then air comes this direction through a supply plenum and then is distributed out. And so what you would otherwise see here is off these start collars, you would see ducts themselves. So at these ducts, proper practice is to have dampers. So these would be manual dampers that would be inserted inside of these start collars that you can change and move so that you can provide more or less airflow to certain areas of the house. That's not an end-all be-all, but it is one first step to see if you can force some air from one area to another, etc. It is a bit like trying to move water in your hands, so it can be a little bit difficult to have exactly perfectly, and is contingent based on the design of the ducts after that. A lot of these ducts will start as one and then Y off and go to different areas, etc. So a damper, this is obviously much smaller than would be otherwise. This is a 14-inch start collar. The damper would be full size to this and would change and open, that you'd be able to manually change. You could even do it yourself at your house. It's one of the first things that we check as air conditioning professionals. Beyond that, you could consider getting your ducts sized correctly. A lot of homes have improperly sized ducts, many of which that we see are undersized. They don't have the proper volume provided to certain areas, but there is a design process that's involved with that you need to get a professional, a true professional over there who can size, measure, and set that up. The process for that is Manual D, which is very extensive. So for more details on that, call an air conditioning professional. After that, one other way is, these are manual dampers that open and close. You can go to what's called electronic dampers. Whoa! Electronic dampers are these. So they have the same basic function as a manual damper, except they know when to open and close. And so they're able to change how much air is going in and out of an area based on what is being told to it. So this will wire to a board, and that board will go to extra thermostats. So you can set up additional thermostats throughout the home that can know exact temperatures and can tell these bad boys how to open and close and provide air that is more comfortable to those areas. Again, you do need a professional in order to design that correctly and appropriately and be able to make it work right. So those are electronic zone dampers. There's a lot of different types out there. This one's a Honeywell. Okay, after zoning manual dampers or redesigning the system, your ducts, another option is to get mini splits. Mini splits are basically spot cooling systems where you could cool or heat a specific area of the house exactly how you want it. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be this kind of indoor head deal that's going to be up on a wall. There's a lot of different options out there. You're not limited to this style of head. You can have it so that you can even be behind walls where you don't see it. But this is a very, very common option. Air is drawn in through the top and ultimately comes out the bottom to cool the individual space. It's set to a specific temperature and can be very, very effective for cooling a one singular place in a house. So this is going to be a little bit more expensive than a couple of the other options, but is very viable and a very good way to do this in a very efficient fashion. These units are typically very, very efficient systems. So if you, outside of these elements, you should consider what insulation levels you have in the house. You probably need to update your insulation levels if your home is older. We walk through many, many homes where the insulation level is very, very poor and people have no idea. Just by improving the insulation level, you're gonna get increased comfort and your systems aren't gonna have to work as hard. So outside of manual dampers, zoning, changing the system, adding insulation, putting in a mini split, you could always just move to a different house if you really wanted to, but you might have the same problems there. So, or you can move to a different climate, maybe like California or something like that. So, but if you live in Houston, these are the primary ways that you can try to solve some of the comfort problems when you have hot spots and cold spots in your house.